the beginning of a perfect family. If someone had asked me 5 years ago to define happiness, I would have described Sunday mornings in our stately white brick home in Palo Alto. Picture this: sunlight spilling through French doors, dappling the glossy kitchen floor where I brewed my signature vanilla latte. My husband, Andrew, handsome in his t-shirt and morning stubble, would tiptoe behind me, trying to steal a kiss while pretending he urgently needed his coffee fix. Laughter would echo as I swatted him playfully, and he'd lift our daughter Emma out of her high chair, spinning her around while she squealed with delight. That's how I convinced myself fairy tales could bleed into real life. I'm Claire Bennett, 32, and for anyone looking in, my world fit neatly into every American dream cliche. We lived in one of the prettiest neighborhoods in Silicon Valley, flanked by magnolia trees and the hum of Teslas gliding down the street. I built my own marketing consultancy from scratch. Andrew ran investments at a tech firm. We owned shares, bought art, drank vintage wine at charity galas, and always, threw Thanksgiving feasts that friends still rave about. We were that couple, the one others envied, the one younger friends turned to for advice. "Where do you find time for romance, Claire?" they'd tease. "How do you both balance work and family?" The truth, I did believe we were lucky. I'd met Andrew at Stanford 10 years back. He had wild ambition in his eyes and a touching vulnerability he tried desperately to hide under layers of wit. I was drawn to that invisible bruise. Our love unfolded almost embarrassingly quickly. Engagement after a year, wedding at a vineyard in Carmel the next summer. By 29, I had what my mother once called the jackpot: family, stability, love, and enough fortune to breathe easy. But beneath the surface gloss, there were cracks even then. Moments when Andrew spent too many hours at the office or vanished into his phone mid-dinner. He brushed it off as the cost of career success. I wanted to believe him. I took his explanations, pocketed my doubts, and kept polishing our image for the rest of the world. After all, what was marriage if not a leap of faith? And, sometimes, an act of willful optimism? We built more than just a house together. We built rituals, birthday cakes with Emma's handprints and icing, trips to Lake Tahoe every spring, and Saturday night movie marathons in our den. These memories tethered me to the idea that, at our core, we were solid. When I looked across the marble kitchen island and watched Andrew play board games with Emma, I marveled at how natural it all seemed, how effortless. Maybe that's why I missed the warning signs. Maybe that's how love works. It makes you notice all the little beautiful things and gently blinds you to the shadows forming at your feet. Silent fractures. If I'm being honest, the first cracks in our marriage were so subtle, and I was so expertly skilled at ignoring them, I almost missed them. Looking back, I suppose it started with a shift in Andrew's laughter, a distracted quality I couldn't name, but one that made my heart ache, even as I told myself I was being ridiculous. There were little things, like the way he'd glance at his phone during dinner, his thumb dancing anxiously over the screen, or the extra hours at work he chalked up to critical deadlines. He wore that as a badge of honor, and for years, so did I. Having a hard-working husband was a symphony echoing through my circles of friends. But slowly, the tune soured. I remember one evening in autumn, leaves turning gold outside our window. I was texting my best friend Rachel, who had been with me through every high and heartbreak since my freshman year at Stanford. And I noticed she was suddenly evasive about coming over for our Friday movie night. She used to arrive with her laugh, ready to fill the room, but now she was tired, busy, apologetic. Oddly, Her texts began to mirror Andrew's. Short, rushed, full of vague excuses. My mind tried to dismiss it. The world moves fast, and we're all stretched thin. But my gut wouldn't settle. One cold November night, I happened to pick up Andrew's jacket, to hang it by the door, and a faint scent of perfume I didn't recognize drifted up. It was floral, bold, definitely not my usual soft vanilla. My stomach tightened. I knew better than to jump to conclusions. We hosted so many events, a dozen women could have brushed against him. But the seed of doubt was there now, burrowing into my routines, sprouting more questions each day. I started to notice patterns, the way Andrew's voice would lower when he got certain calls, his eyes flickering away if I entered the room, Rachel's sudden reluctance to linger after dinners. Sometimes I'd wake up at night and find Andrew missing from our bed. I'd tiptoe into the hall, only to hear the muted hum of his voice behind the bathroom door, talking to someone, not realizing I was standing there in the dark, straining to decipher the conversation. Despite my growing unease, I did what any good wife is trained to do: smile, berry, smooth. "Are you okay?" friends would ask. And of course I was. I always was. But inside, nerves began to coil, pressing tighter with each inexplicable moment. The worst part wasn't the suspicion itself. It was the isolation that came with it. I felt like I was watching my life from a distance, performing the role of the perfect wife and mother, while my heart stumbled in the shadows, afraid of what it might find. Yet, as much as the pain simmered, I could not bring myself to confront either of them. Instead, I decided to wait, to watch. If there was a truth lurking beneath the surface of our perfect home, I would uncover it, but not yet. For now, I wore my brightest smile, all the while bracing myself for the darkness I suspected was waiting just out of sight. The silent investigation. If betrayal has a sound, I imagine it's like the echo of your own breath in an empty house late at night. It was in those moments, when Michael was away, Jacob asleep, the polished kitchen gleaming in moonlight, that I resolved to learn the truth, no matter how much it would hurt. Silence, I realized, benefits the liar. And I was done being lied to. The investigation didn't begin with drama, but with deliberate caution. I started by retracing Michael's calendar and travel receipts, things any resourceful PR executive could do. I was methodical, as if prepping for a high-profile crisis campaign. Every meeting, every dinner, every unexplained expense got its own folder, carefully labeled. But more than paper trails, it was the human patterns that told the real story. I noted the late-night text pings I'd overhear when he let his guard down. One evening, while folding laundry, I caught a message preview flash across his screen. "Miss you. Last night was unforgettable." My heart launched into my throat, but my body switched to autopilot. I smiled when he walked in, handed him fresh towels, then spent the entire night replaying that single line. Next, I turned to social media. It's amazing what people reveal when their guard is down. Michael's posts were always buttoned up, but I noticed mutual check-ins at the same locations as a woman named Sarah Blake, my once close friend from when Jacob was in preschool. A wave of nausea hit me, but I kept scrolling, gathering screenshots, searching for patterns. They weren't careful, not really. Lunches at the same obscure downtown cafe, tickets to the same jazz show, even likes and inside joke comments I'd overlooked before. I remembered how Sarah used to gush about her mysterious new flame once Michael's trips increased, describing habits eerily similar to Michael's, his love of scotch, his habit of tapping the table when thinking. My gut twisted at the realization. It wasn't just infidelity. It was betrayal of the most personal kind, threaded into my friendships, my memories, my day-to-day life. Despite the mounting evidence, I didn't confront either of them yet. Instead, I got organized. I started journaling, not just my emotions, but the concrete moments that didn't add up. The gold earring I found wedged in our car's back seat, the scent of unfamiliar perfume lingering on his work jackets, random cash withdrawals from our joint account. I took photos, filed receipts, kept logs of dates and details. The more I uncovered, the more detached I became. Not out of coldness, but necessity. There was a surreal clarity in methodically cataloging my own heartbreak. I reached out to a private investigator, a woman named Jessica, who specialized in discreet, high-net-worth cases. I handed her everything: my careful files, suspicions, even a map of Sarah's new apartment. I wanted proof I could trust in court, not just in my own mind. Jessica moved quickly. Within 2 weeks, she'd compiled photos. Michael and Sarah entering the Park Hill Hotel, hours apart, but always together inside. Intimate dinners at candlelit bistros, elevator security footage of hands lingering too long. Even with the proof, I felt a strange calm, like the quiet just before a thunderstorm. In every interaction afterward, I played my part flawlessly, as if nothing in our world had changed. I didn't want Michael to sense my knowledge. Not before I had a plan. I stopped questioning his absences, even encouraged another boys' night out. I needed him careless. Meanwhile, I gathered legal support. My cousin Allison, a fiercely competitive divorce attorney, became my silent conspirator. Together, we reviewed our prenuptial agreements, asset arrangements, and mapped out contingencies. In every meeting with consultants and accountants, I became someone else, unflinching, practical, almost ruthless. Pain had stripped me of sentimentality, but I was never only seeking retribution. I wanted my life back, my sense of dignity, my freedom from the toxic uncertainty that had wrapped itself around every waking thought. I wanted to look at Jacob and know I was teaching him strength, not submission to a manufactured illusion. As days blurred into nights filled with surveillance reports and legal paperwork, my image of our family, once solid as the brick of our home, shattered into sharp, glittering fragments. I gathered those pieces to build my new resolve, waiting for the right moment to change the direction of my life. The silent investigation became my armor, to prevent anyone, ever again, from making a fool of me in my own story. Irrefutable evidence. It was a Wednesday in late spring when Janice, my private investigator, handed me the file that broke the last of my illusions. I remember shaking as I took the sealed envelope to my studio. Sunlight was pooling across the drafting table, catching on my favorite sketches, making everything look almost holy. I shut the door, set the envelope down, and stared at it as if it were a living, venomous thing. My hands trembled as I loosened the clasp. Inside were grainy photographs, color printouts, and a meticulous timeline. Elizabeth, my lawyer, had cautioned me that evidence could be painful, but nothing quite prepared me for the sting of clarity it would deliver. The first photo, Mark and Kate in the lobby of the Hamilton Hotel, heads close, undeniably intimate, even among strangers. A timestamp, the same evening Mark claimed to be at a late board dinner in Menlo Park. There were receipts, room service for two, Kate's known favorite, grilled artichoke and red wine. Page after page laid out their meetings, a ballet ticket stub, both their names, a string of Uber rides to and from the same address, sometimes only minutes apart, surveillance shots of their bodies angled toward each other in that unmistakable way that says, this is more than friendship. A wave of nausea washed over me. My mind wanted to fragment, to make excuses again. Maybe they just needed to talk. Maybe someone misread things. Maybe. But the evidence was relentless. There were texts, secured via Janice's data recovery partner. Miss you already. Counting minutes till we're together again. Conversations about a weekend trip to Tahoe in a rental car. Identical to one Mark sworn was a company offsite. My stomach tightened with every read. More crushing than the acts themselves was the realization that Mark and Kate had built a universe behind my back. Inside jokes, favorite restaurants, even small rituals. Mark had never remembered my favorite flower. But there he was, ordering white peonies for Kate, congratulating her on her recent promotion in a message stuffed with heart emojis. Buried among the obvious exchanges were the little betrayals that cut the most. A thread of texts in which they joked about my obsessive party planning skills, Kate mocking my color-coded calendars. I had always held our friendship above all others, trusted Kate with the secrets of my marriage, my motherhood worries, my triumphs and defeats. The facts stripped all sentimentality from those memories. The two people I loved most had conspired not just to deceive me sexually or emotionally, but to erode my very confidence, doubting my instincts, making jokes at my expense, and spinning a web designed to keep me in the dark. I spent days oscillating between numbing disbelief and an ice-cold sense of purpose. I would not let my pain reduce me to rage or destruction. I was determined to fight with intelligence, not outrage. I made copies of everything. Digital backups, hard drives stored in a safe deposit box, paginated and time-stamped folders for my lawyer. I maintained my composure through every school pickup, dinner party, and PTA meeting. To Mark and Kate, my behavior must have seemed either a continuation of naivete or perhaps a sign of stress about work. I ensured my poker face was perfection. The day I finally showed Elizabeth the dossier, she nodded with approval, a flicker of grim respect between professionals facing a challenge. She outlined next steps for my protection: freezing joint assets, collecting home security footage, compiling logs of Mark's financial transactions, and mapping the timeline of infidelity for court proceedings. Every legal step was calculated to ensure leverage and justice, not vengeance. But deep down, this was more than a divorce or a battle for assets. This was a reckoning. Kate, my best friend, who had mingled with my family, watched my child grow up, shared Sunday pancakes at my table, now facing complete social ruin when the truth became public. Mark, always charming and respected, on the verge of losing not just his position in our home, but his standing in the insular, reputation-obsessed Silicon Valley community. That afternoon, as I filed the final evidence into our case folder, I realized I no longer felt like a victim. I was the architect of my own liberation, armed with proof and unwavering resolve. I would not merely survive this betrayal. I would leverage every resource, every ounce of discipline to win back my peace, my dignity, and my daughter's future. Looking back, the evidence Janice delivered wasn't just for the court or headlines. It became the tool that cut the last thread, binding me to a carefully managed lie. My story from then on would not be written in shadows or shame. It would be built, painfully but unflinchingly, on facts, strategy, and an unshakable sense of self. The lies were over. My new life had begun. The cold plan of retribution. In those first quiet days, after receiving every last damning proof, I think a part of me expected to collapse. Maybe the old Claire would have unraveled, screaming, slamming doors, throwing Mark's boxes onto the lawn under the unblinking gaze of our neighbors. But something inside me had shifted forever. the moment I stared down at those color photographs and ugly messages. Rage, heartbreak, even shame, they simmered beneath the surface. But what broke through, maybe surprisingly, was pure clarity. I didn't want drama. I wanted justice. I wanted control. I wanted my power back. I remember sitting alone at our long walnut dining table that evening. The house was still. Emma at her ballet class. Mark texting that he'd be home, late for work. I poured myself a glass of Syrah, the stuff we saved for anniversaries, and made myself a promise. I would not let them destroy me. Not by turning into a villain in my own story. And certainly not by letting the world look at me and see a wounded, abandoned woman. No, if there was a reckoning, I would orchestrate every step. And I would lead with strategy, not chaos. First, I called my lawyer, Liz, and asked for a meeting at her office. Not at a cafe, not over the phone, but somewhere private and unmistakably professional. Liz, a New York transplant, whip smart and no nonsense, had handled everything from infidelity to corporate takedowns in this zip code. She greeted me with a half smile and an enormous folder, already dense with notes from my emails and calls. Together, we began to sketch out scenarios, risks, and the best way to use the mountain of evidence in my favor. I hadn't anticipated how clinical it could all feel. We divided assets into 3 categories: joint, the house, our investment accounts, our cars; his alone, some tech stocks, a vintage guitar, the frankly ridiculous wine club memberships; and mine, my business, my inheritance, and artwork I'd collected over the years. We compared the prenuptial agreement, which, thanks to both our ambitious, lawyerly mothers, was airtight against infidelity. Mark must have forgotten that clause over time. I didn't. For every meeting, I came prepared. Spreadsheets, annotated logs, copies of every receipt Janice had, uncovered. Liz urged me to keep my demeanor exactly as it had always been at home. Don't tip your hand, Claire. Let him keep digging his grave. The advice felt cold, but I craved its discipline. Retribution, I realized, works best in silence. Meanwhile, I started assembling a team outside the courtroom. My cousin Sarah, a forensic accountant, flew in for a girls' weekend that was anything but relaxing. Over takeout Thai and piles of banking statements, she taught me how to track shell transfers. Mark thought nobody would notice. I found 2 bank accounts in Reno in the Cayman Islands. Clear signs Mark had planned for contingencies, or perhaps just for a dream life, free of me. I closed those doors with 1 set of phone calls, and Liz put a freeze on all withdrawals over a certain amount. If Mark noticed, he never let on. Then, there was Madison. How does one plot the right level of vengeance for a best friend turned traitor? My first instinct was public exposure, but Liz cautioned me on the legal risk of publishing messages or texts. California was litigious, after all. So, instead, I decided on something more subtle. We would let the news seep through the right circles, just enough to make Madison's social prospects wilt. I confided in 2 women from my book club, both of whom sat on boards at the Women in Tech Foundation, a group Madison was desperate to join. News like that, whispered with just the right mix of pity and outrage, travels fast in Silicon Valley. I orchestrated every detail. On Sundays, I'd wake early and bake muffins with Emma, then Google every divorce precedent in our county. At night, I drafted letters to the Parents Association at Emma's school, casual, but with pointed reminders of Mark's adjusted responsibilities in case he tried to use Emma's schedule as a wedge. I made lists. Which assets were most important to me? Which friendships felt real? Which dreams deserved to survive this storm? I grew sharper, almost
Don't worry about
mercenary.
what they find.
Perhaps it sounds cold, but it was necessary. I would not let either of them use my kindness as a weapon against me anymore. Every encounter became part of the plan. When Mark brought up a family vacation, I smiled encouragingly and offered to coordinate flights. I even scheduled a date night with him, a final test, and a chance to slip an extra USB of evidence into my lawyer's safe. Madison continued to text me, feigning concern about my stress at work. I responded with brief, bland emojis, refusing to give her the raw drama she craved. In public, I remained gracious, hosting a fundraiser and inviting both Mark and Madison, as if nothing at all was changing. I watched the two of them across the lawn, their laughter now brittle, nervous under my gaze. The power of silence became my greatest weapon. While Mark boasted about closing a deal, or Madison posted bright, filtered snapshots of her newfound joy, I was the only one operating outside the delusion. Retribution wasn't some single action, but a series of chess moves, slowly boxing them in. I instructed Janice to continue surveillance, particularly on Mark's digital footprint and Madison's new consulting projects. Ironically, many pitched to my own firm. When I discovered Madison quoting my past pitches to my own clients, I sent a measured cease and desist through my attorney, enough to chill any future thefts, and to quietly warn her she couldn't piggyback on my reputation any longer. It was methodical, exhausting work, preserving dignity in front of Emma, feigning calm in every interaction, chronicling every new bit of data. I learned to breathe through the anxiety, to keep my focus on the outcome, not the day-to-day pain. The more collected and restrained I became, the more Mark and Madison seemed on edge. Madison stopped coming to book club. Mark grew terse at home, flinched away from routine questions about his schedule. They sensed the ground shifting, but not why. Perhaps the coldest plan was the day I transferred a portion of our assets into a trust for Emma, a move that went unnoticed by Mark, buried as an education fund adjustment. It would protect her and me in the event the divorce became a bare-knuckle fight. When Liz filed the first set of separation paperwork, disguised as a simple, irrevocable agreement at first glance, my hands shook. But my heart was steady. I never raised my voice. No public Instagram rants, no late-night phone calls or confrontations loaded with venom. Part of me mourned the idealistic Claire, the woman who believed in loyalty above all. But the new Claire understood that sometimes self-preservation requires precision. My retribution played out in contracts, legal letters, and the sudden, subtle closing of social doors. In our last family dinner before the separation filings, Mark looked at me over the table, searching for some sign of defeat or accusation. I smiled, passed the butter, asked about his latest project. Emma chattered about her school play. Outwardly, I was the picture of composure, the wife he thought he'd outsmarted. Inside, I was already moving forward, unwilling to give away my freedom or my pride for anyone again. The fall of the betrayer. If I ever imagined the moment my world would come crashing down, I'd always pictured chaos, shouting, broken dishes, slammed doors. But when retribution finally circled back to Mark and Madison, it arrived with shocking stillness. After all the deceptions, tireless investigations, and sleepless nights spent plotting every detail of my response, their downfall felt as inevitable as the turning of the seasons, and just as unsentimental. The morning Mark received the official separation documents was eerily calm. Pale sunlight fell through the living room like nothing had changed. He stood at the marble counter, reading every page, his name printed neat and final on each, lips drawn tight, brow furrowed. In disbelief, across from him, His favorite mug, a Father's Day gift from Emma, rested between us, a silent witness. His hands trembled as he flipped through my precise accounting. Asset divisions, trust reallocations, documented evidence of infidelity, and custody proposals so meticulous that he knew arguing would just dig the hole deeper. Not once did he meet my eyes. His defeat wasn't loud. It was the quiet unraveling of someone who finally realizes they've wagered more than they could ever afford to lose. He muttered something, an apology, a protest, but the words barely formed. What could he possibly say that the photos, bank statements, and late-night messages hadn't already confessed for him? I watched his reflection in the kitchen window, expecting some eruption, but what I saw was the crumbling of a facade he'd worked years to build. For so long, Mark had celebrated his reputation. The doting family man, the confident Silicon Valley player, the friend you could trust in any storm. In the span of one morning, that entire mythology collapsed with barely a sound. Meanwhile, the social reckoning for Madison was as swift as it was surgical. If Silicon Valley prides itself on anything, it's discretion. But that doesn't mean rumors don't slither through the cracks with breathtaking efficiency. Her name began to vanish from guest lists. Invitations were rescinded, board offers evaporated, and so many mutual friends adopted a studied neutrality whenever her name came up. It wasn't sudden exile. It was death by 1,000 frosty silences. Each time she tried to insert herself into old circles, she found the air a little colder, the conversation drifting away. She'd once been the center of energy at every gathering. Now, I gathered from whispers. Her lunches were spent mostly staring at her untouched salad, more words unspoken than said. Professionally, the fallout was even worse. She'd relied on my referrals for years. Those subtle introductions, the reputation boost of being seen as my trusted colleague. Once the separation went public, those bridges burned behind her. The Women in Tech Foundation quietly distanced itself, and her biggest client, one I'd recruited years ago, reconsidered their contract. I didn't need to sabotage her career outright. In this community, betrayal is its own poison. You simply have to let the truth breathe. But the collapse wasn't about money or career trajectories. It was about the unmooring of lives built on deception. Madison reached out to me once. A trembling email subject lined, "I'm sorry. I know I don't deserve an answer." She confessed to weakness, to longing, to losing herself. She begged for forgiveness, not to restore our friendship, but so she could sleep through the night again. I left the message unread, not out of malice, but a refusal to let her grief become my responsibility. For Mark, the unraveling was slower, crueler. Every week, something small slipped away. Colleagues stood a little farther from him at corporate events, his inbox filled with polite regrets. Emma, wise beyond her years, sensed the tension. She asked gentle, searching questions. I told her the truth in age-appropriate fragments. Daddy made choices that hurt the family, but we will always keep her safe and loved. Watching a father lose the pedestal his daughter once placed him on is agony no mother wishes to witness. Yet I held steady, refusing to let his guilt become my burden. Every custody drop-off, every parent-teacher conference became an exercise in composure. He once pleaded, late-night voicemails, texts sent in bursts, that he was sorry, that he'd lost his way, that what he did was just a mistake. But the mistake had been deliberate, repeated, a thread purling through the fabric of our lives until it finally tore. I offered him dignity in the legal end, clean asset splits, therapeutic mediation for Emma's sake. No tabloid headlines, In return, I demanded and received a written confession, an acknowledgement my mind could finally rest on, a line drawn under all the gaslighting and emotional warfare. As their respective worlds shrank, mine gradually, quietly expanded. The friends who had once circled Mark and Madison out of habit now gravitated toward my candor. The calm with which I handled our public split became a balm for others, enduring their own betrayals. Invitations filled my calendar, not out of pity, but respect. I learned you uncover true allies only after every mask has been yanked away and the party is over. My lawyer, Liz, once said, reputations in communities like ours fall quietly until one day you wake up and realize you have no allies left. That's exactly what happened. Mark, once the life of every networking event, found his drinks invitations dwindling. Madison, always ready with a joke, watched her phone grow still. I observed it all at a distance, a scientist noting the consequences of a failed experiment. What had begun as my private crisis had broadcast through the invisible grapevine until everyone chose sides. But there was no joy for me in their undoing. Relief, yes, liberation even. Still, I never cheered their pain. Perhaps I was too exhausted. Perhaps vindication is quieter than you think when it finally comes. Mostly, I focused on Emma, on my business, on rerouting myself in the present. Every time someone whispered, "You're handling this so gracefully," I wanted to confess the cost. Years of self-doubt, nightly anxiety, and silent endurance. Instead, I smiled and thanked them. Then went home and packed up boxes of Mark's old clothes for Goodwill, letting the past go one cotton shirt at a time. One moment sticks with me most. It was Emma's birthday. Mark was invited for the first joint celebration since the separation. He arrived early, visibly thinner, shoulders hunched. When the candles were lit, he tried to lead the singing, his voice wobbling out of key. Emma blew out her candles, everyone clapped, and just for a second, I caught Mark looking at me, not with anger, not with pleading, but with a tired acceptance. He understood now, finally, that some things can't be fixed. That loss, once chosen, becomes permanent. Madison, I heard, started over in another city. One less judgmental, perhaps, or simply unfamiliar with her story. She never sent another email. The last thing I saw was a photo, online, of her at a new firm's launch party. Her smile was flawless, but only a stranger would believe it was real. Sometimes I still wonder if I should have given her closure. Sometimes I ache for what we all lost. The lazy weekends, the inside jokes, watching our children grow side by side. But I never doubt my decision. Their fall wasn't about vengeance. It was about drawing boundaries so clearly, so publicly, that everyone, myself most of all, knew what would and wouldn't be tolerated ever again. This wasn't the ending I wanted, but perhaps it was always the one I needed. In the echoing silence of my new life, there's space for hope and peace and new beginnings no one can compromise. Sometimes, the best retribution is simply refusing to be broken, letting those who betrayed you fade out of your story while you, finally, move forward. My ending, my freedom. 2 years have flown by since the day I closed the last chapter of the saga that nearly shattered me. Sometimes it feels like a lifetime has passed. Other times, just a sleepless night. When people find out what I survived, friends, colleagues, even strangers at networking events, they expect to hear a triumphant tale of revenge, or perhaps a bitter monologue about regret. But the story I tell is quieter, deeper. It is a story of how I pieced myself together, not stronger or braver than before, but truer, and maybe, finally,
Dispatch, this is
free.
Unit 4.
Freedom,
Moving
I
upstairs now,
learned,
sounds heavy
isn't
above me.
fireworks
Send backup to
or
the rear
victory
entrance.
laps. In fact, real freedom looks a lot like my sun-drenched kitchen at 6 a.m. Soft steam rising off the coffee mug, Emma's sleepy hair ruffling as she pads in for breakfast. The house echoing, not with tension anymore, but with possibility. For a long time, I wasn't sure I'd ever taste peace again. The noise of betrayal and consequence was all-consuming. Yet, step by step, I rebuilt my world, on no one's terms, but my own. Those first months after the dust settled were the hardest. There were days I didn't recognize myself. From the outside, I kept up my armor. Clients still trusted my consultancy. My friends admired my poise, and the world kept spinning. But inside, pieces of me felt fractured. Divorce makes you a stranger in your own home. Every corner haunted by both the very best and very worst memories. I learned to say goodbye, to let go of what no longer served me. Not just Mark or Madison, but the old story I clung to about what a perfect life was supposed to look like. My therapist, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Ruth, used to challenge me every session. Who are you now, Claire, if you're not holding the walls up for everyone else? At first, I had no answer. I'd spent so long performing resilience. I'd lost sight of what it meant just to be, to wake without dread, to admit when I felt lost, to set boundaries that meant closure instead of punishment. Slowly, painfully, I peeled away the guilt and anger, discovering beneath them the simple truth of what I wanted, a life built honestly, even if it was harder and messier. Rebuilding was not about grand gestures or sudden revelations. It was the collection of 100 small choices, painting new colors on the living room walls, donating our old family photo albums I could not bear to look through, discovering, on rainy Sunday afternoons, that I could feel happy again with just a favorite novel and Emma's laughter drifting down the hall. Sometimes I missed the comfort of old routines, but I learned that comfort can be the enemy of growth. I forced myself to try new things. Tennis lessons, I'm hilariously bad. Dance classes, better, but only just. Road trips along Highway 1, with nothing but silence in the Pacific for company. Emma was my North Star. In her resilience, I found my path forward. We learned together what it meant to be a different family, but a real one. No more hiding behind appearances. At first, she asked about her father often. I answered with honesty, never venom. Daddy and I both love you, but sometimes loving each other isn't enough to stay together. Emma taught me grace. Kids notice so much more than we want them to, but they also forgive so much more easily than adults ever do. Watching her adjust, seeing her find joy at ballet recitals and birthday parties again, gave me hope I didn't know I still had. Career-wise, I poured myself into what I'd built, but with fresh boundaries. No more letting clients call after hours. No more bringing my laptop to family dinners. I joined a women's founders group, shared my story, at first behind closed doors, then later on bigger stages, and found I wasn't alone. Almost every table I sat at, someone would pull me aside and whisper their own secret saga of betrayal, of loss, of clawing their lives back from the edge. I realized that sharing my pain, my failures, my awkward attempts to make sense of it all was a kind of service. The more I gave voice to my survival, the less power the story had over me. And yes, there were relapses. Nights when I'd scroll through old texts or see Mark's name pop up on LinkedIn and feel that familiar surge of anger. Sometimes Madison's laugh would float up on a mutual friend's Instagram story, sharp and unwelcome. In those moments, I reminded myself that healing is not a straight line. Ruth called it looping back so you can leap forward. I allowed myself to grieve, Not just the marriage or the friendship, but the person I had been. The one who didn't see the betrayal coming, who still believed unconditional love could conquer anything. Eventually, the pain lost its edge. I stopped comparing my life to anyone else's. The old feelings, shame, rage, even envy, receded and were replaced by a kind of fragile confidence. I started dating again, tentatively at first. Most dates were forgettable, a few hilariously disastrous. One, a software engineer named Justin, turned into a brief, healing friendship, full of long walks and candid, unsentimental laughter. I found that I didn't need a new partner to be whole. I just needed to feel visible, to myself, first and always. My friendships deepened. The women who stood by me in the thick of it became my tribe. We built new traditions, brunches at odd little cafes, wine nights that ended in laughter instead of tears, trips to the coast that felt, for the first time in years, free of performance. Some old friends faded away, uncomfortable with my transformation or unwilling to pick sides. That stung, but it was honest. There is a quiet gift, I discovered, in the pruning of your life. The things and people that remain are there by true choice. Financially, I found my footing. Every dollar I'd once feared losing became, instead, an investment in Emma's and my future. I bought a smaller house, sunny and practical, with a tiny garden and a window seat for reading. No more white brick showplaces, just warm walls and clean energy. I started giving back too, mentoring young women, volunteering at a shelter, sometimes just listening. My story wasn't unique. In sharing it, I helped others patch their own cracks too. Mark drifted further into the background. We set clear boundaries, simple, civil co-parenting, minimal contact otherwise. There were bumps, awkward meetings at Emma's concerts, forced smiles at school conferences, the occasional flare-up about schedules or discipline. But we kept Emma's needs first. I could not shield her entirely from the hurt, but I could show her a mother who stood firm, chose kindness without sacrificing firmness, and built a peaceful haven from chaos. That became my truest achievement. Not revenge, not even recovery, but the promise of safety and stability for my daughter. There was a time I believed justice would taste sweeter, when I pictured Mark and Madison shunned at every party, suffering the loneliness they'd forced on me.
I didn't do anything.
But the farther I got from those days, the less I cared about their penance. Their downfall and my healing walked separate paths. I wished them no ill. I simply no longer wished for their company in my story. True freedom, it turned out, wasn't in winning some cosmic scorecard, but in losing interest in the outcome entirely. With every passing month, my solitude felt less like an emptiness and more like a canvas. I found new passions. Gardening, never my forte, now an obsession. Painting, hiking trails I'd once been afraid of exploring alone. I traveled, New York, Paris, even a writer's retreat in Mendocino, where I read my first personal essay aloud to a room full of strangers and didn't flinch, telling my story, not as tragedy, but as rebirth, brought a kind of closing. I was not a cautionary tale, but proof that life can break you and you still get to decide what to build from the ruins. Emma and I marked our own milestones. Our first Christmas, just us two. A summer on the Oregon coast, baking a birthday cake from scratch, disastrously dense, but ours. Sometimes late at night, I'd still dream of the old house, the echo of past laughter and pain, but the sorrow dulled, no longer a sharp ache, just a memory gently receding into the distance. People sometimes ask if I believe in love anymore. The answer is yes, fiercely so. But it is a different love, one that starts with knowing my own worth. I've learned that forgiveness matters, but it is not owed or easy. Trust is not given without cause. But I am not afraid to offer it again. I value resilience, less as armor, and more as a garden I must tend daily, with kindness, honesty, and the grace to let new things grow. On the 2-year anniversary of my new life, Emma and I lit a single candle over dinner, not mourning the past, but acknowledging how far we'd traveled. She asked, innocent, earnest, if I was happy now. I answered her honestly, yes, because I am myself again. Because being whole isn't about never breaking, but about loving what you learn in the process. And I meant it. The final freedom isn't about escaping pain. It's about giving yourself permission to live openly, even after being shattered. It's laughter at breakfast, quiet at bedtime, knowing the past can't harm you anymore. It's letting hope in, not as fantasy, but as a daily practice. It's discovering that after all the storms, life gives you a morning with sunlight through the kitchen window and a future built, finally, sweetly, on your own terms.